There is definitely something very wrong here. Okay? At a funeral in Siaya, attended by both principals of the broad-based government, Raila Odinga and President William Samoei Ruto, something very bizarre happened, which should immediately tell any keen observer of politics, iko kitu, there is something very wrong here. Okay? Secretary General of the ODM party, in fact one of the signatories, because of his capacity, of the broad-based government agreement, very politely points out something to President William Samoei Ruto during his speech. But this one rubs the president the wrong way. And the president, when he gets up to speak, cannot resist the temptation to actually read the Riot Act. Yeah, although he tried to make it a joke. To actually read the Riot Act to Bwana Sifuna. Naona mtu hapa anaongea na nguvu sana. Kuja pole pole. Eish. That is exactly what happened. And then, at the very same burial, during the very same speeches, Minority Leader Junet Mohammed gives a very different speech from the speech his own Secretary General of his own party gave. He's full of praises for Ruto. He even says he is very proud of the role he played in impeaching former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. Hey. And the confusion does not stop there. The host governor, Siaya Governor James Agri Orengo, gives a very stormy speech. He talks about the Constitution and he wants people to stick to the Constitution, which allows free speech. And he keeps on repeating that he's not one who believes in singing praises. He's talking about singing praises to who? Isn't it rather obvious? To Ruto. And all these people are in the same party. The largest political party within Eastern Central Africa. And one of the oldest, the Orange Democratic Movement. All of them are from that house. But they're talking very differently. What is going on here? Karibu sana to my show today, where we're going to discover something that will definitely have an impact politically in the days to come, and weeks to come. Let's not even talk about months. This is something that is simmering and definitely has reached a kind of boiling point. Something has to happen. Okay? And as is our tradition, let us start this story from the beginning. This was the funeral of trusted Raila Odinga security man, bodyguard, Bwana Odwor, who has served Raila and even served his father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. He passed on at a Nairobi hospital from a short illness. And I took my time with research on this one because I sensed very early there is something here. Okay? And what that means is that I did some thorough digging, including observing very carefully the body language, who spoke to who hugged who after making their speeches. And I came up with a lot of super fascinating facts. Okay? Maybe I need to ask you at this early juncture. When you see people fidgeting, what does that body language mean? Somebody's talking, is praising you, is praising your group, you're seated there, you're not smiling, you're not nodding your head in agreement, but what you're doing instead is that you're fidgeting. You're removing this bottle from here, putting it there, then you remember you have to drink it, You put it down again, then you remember you've not had enough. And other people within the same group are just holding their chin. They're looking down. What does that body language mean? What does the ODM top brass know that the rest of Kenyans don't know? Now I'm sure you'll agree with me, that kind of body language is very clear. The ODM high table was very uncomfortable. And now you need to ask yourself why the president had attended this burial. Why are they uncomfortable? Okay? Stay with me. We shall dig into all that. And I assure you, we will find the answers. Okay? Now, Junet Mohammed spoke first. And it was more than clear. Huyu ni mtu wa broad based. Yuko ndani kabisa of the broad based government. Yeah. He went out of his way to please Ruto. Okay? Even talking about the pleasure he got from impeaching former deputy president Rigathi Gachagua. Now, there is a super fascinating aside here that I cannot resist. Wembe ni ile ile. You see, Ruto handlers and Ruto himself did not realize that when they impeached Gachagua, you remember the allegations they brought against him? Do you remember? Tribalism, etc., etc. Which, by the way, is the first time in the Kenyan history that a vice president or a deputy president has been impeached in this way. Yeah, by the charges and allegations being interrogated, revealed to the public the reasons as to why, allegedly, Gachagua was being removed. Because in the past, we used to call them vice presidents then. They resigned. Jaramogi Oginga Odinga resigned under a lot of pressure. Josephat Karanja at first resisted to resign, but then he realized he was fighting a losing battle, and therefore he opted to resign. There was no debate in parliament. There was no motion brought forward to discuss and analyze and interrogate the reasons why these people were no longer wanted in government. But with Rigathi Gachagua, for the first time in our history, this thing, admittedly, under a very demanding new 2010 constitution, went all the way. Now my point is this: Ruto has set a precedent. Okay? And it is super fascinating that a lot of the accusations against Rigathi Gachagua are wishy-washy, neither here nor there. Yeah, none of them have really been proved. But then now we have a situation where we have allegations against the President of the Republic of Kenya, which has witnesses, including ordinary Kenyans themselves, which has documented evidence, appointments of PSs, mostly only from one part of the country, etc., etc. Now, that is why I'm saying it is very possible Wembe itakuwa hiyo hiyo. And allow me to shock you by saying the following. There is no guarantee that the involvement of ODM in this government is sustainable. There's no guarantee that it will stay. There's no guarantee that it will still be there tomorrow. No! And I'm going to explain why. I'll come back to that when we come back to this fidgeting manenos. Yeah, fidgeting at the high table when you're being praised. Anyway, bottom line about Wembe ni ile ile is the fact that the standards have been set so low for impeaching a deputy president. And this will definitely be very bad news when somebody decides to impeach the president of Kenya. Because the president that will be used will be that of Rigathi Gachagua. Yeah, where the burden of proof was zero. It was so low. Okay? Now, when Edwin Sifuna stood up at the same funeral to speak, he measured his words carefully. But it was very clear that he started with a direct attack at his own fellow party member, Junet Mohammed. And he quickly pointed out that although Junet Mohammed had painted a very rosy picture of a lot of development happening in the country, he pointed out that there was a huge problem. Because what is in the broad-based agreement signed between UDA and ODM was to send a certain amount of money to the counties. And now Sifuna says he had discussions in Parliament. The agreed figure has already been reduced, which of course is a breach of the broad-based government agreement. I believe that's one of the things that ilichokoza Ruto sana. Yeah? Till he had to tell off the ODM Secretary General in front of the leader of ODM. You umesikia wapi? Okay? That is one of the things that really hit Ruto in a bad place. Of course, Sifuna packaged the whole thing beautifully. Yeah, because he did not accuse the president directly. He said that those under the president, he needs to read them the Riot Act because they're messing up. And he even gave the example of the recent Butere girls fiasco, over the play Echoes of War. But he said that those people working under the president are the ones who are messing. Now we all know that the president is a micromanager. We all know that nothing moves in government without the approval of Ruto. And therefore it is rather obvious this thing was not a mess up by those under Ruto. No, he was involved. But of course Sifuna is a politician, and he read the room perfectly, and therefore he packaged it very beautifully. However, it appears that President Ruto hakuweza kuvumilia. He talked about calling a meeting of the founding members of ODM, of which is one of them, and finding a way to discipline Bwana Sifuna. Actually, politically speaking, that was a big mess up. Obviously, the president lacks something called emotional intelligence, because it is rather obvious he would have come out much better had he said, Bwana Sifuna, I've heard what you have said, I am going to discipline those people who caused this mess. He could easily have distanced himself from the whole fiasco. But no! His rage got in the way. And this is a perfect illustration of the root of some of the very serious problems we have in the country today, which are so serious that now we had to have an agreement, a broad-based government agreement, where the opposition in this agreement were calling for things which are actually in the Constitution. They were calling for things which the president is supposed to do in the first place, without any agreement. Can you imagine having to sign an agreement under duress for you as president to stick to the Constitution? You ulisikia wapi? Very strange. Very, very bizarre. Now, it was Orengo who invited Baba to speak. And Orengo's speech before he invited Raila to speak, I could see Ruto fidgeting in his chair. Because, again, Orengo packaged the whole thing very beautifully. But he was very categorical. Because he said he was in Parliament when people were telling Moi, you will go nowhere. Sycophants were telling Moi, you will leave office when you feel like it. Nothing is going to remove you from there. But of course history tells us Moi had to leave, yeah, against his will. Now, isn't that a direct reference to people at this same funeral who were telling Ruto, relax, you're going nowhere. Ruto will go where? He's going nowhere. Mtu asikutishe Ruto, you're going nowhere. Those are the people Rengo's talking to, yeah, including people like Junet Mohammed, people like Energy CS, Opio Wandae, wale watu wako ndani kabisa ya serikali. Gosh. Roots party leader Wajakoya, the weed professor, was also allowed to speak, and he appealed to Ruto to tame Farouk Kibet. He mentioned Farouk by name. Hey, I don't think Ruto really enjoyed this funeral service, because you see, his trip to Nyanza was to show Kenyans that even if everywhere people are saying Ruto must go, at least in Nyanza he is accepted. But that is not what we saw. In fact, as Ruto was making his speech, there were shouts at the back of the room against Ruto, yeah, mostly in the Luo language. But obviously, these people were not cheering the president. So things are not good. But let's come back to the fidgeting manenos. The body language of the high table. Yeah. Now anybody who understands politics will tell you immediately that a vast majority of politicians, virtually all of them, are very opportunistic. The opportunists, if they see something going in a certain direction, they will look for an advantage going in another direction quickly. Okay? The fidgeting at the ODM high table told me very clearly that the ODM high table are not comfortable in this broad-based government. You know, people can talk anything, but the body never lies. They're definitely not comfortable with this broad-based government arrangement. And the fact that Sifuna, who answers to Baba, and Orengo, who is very close to Raila, spoke the way they did, you can't tell me that they defied Raila, their party leader. I won't believe that. The fact that they spoke the way they did, to me, is a sign that things are boiling inside ODM. A kind of split is imminent. And there are going to be people who will survive and people who will not survive. And ultimately, in my opinion, ODM are going to pull out. Because whether they like it or not, it will soon be impossible for them to remain in this broad-based, or is it bread-based, government arrangement. Now, there was a special report I did some months back where I talked about the cooperation between Raila and Ruto. And at that time, Raila was cooperating with Ruto, but chini ya maji. He was hiding it from the masses. And in that particular special report, I said a few things that are now clearly coming to pass. Did you see it? Well, in my opinion, if you missed it, you really missed something. Okay? Anyway, my point is this. Kenyans need to focus very, very carefully on the ODM party, because there's something that is brewing there that is going to shake the nation. Oh, and something else very fascinating. Babu Owino was present at the funeral. He was not given a chance to speak. And you know, usually he comes with his hecklers. to ensure that he gets a chance to speak, so that when he's overlooked, you'll hear people shouting, Babu Owino, want Babu Owino to talk, etc., etc. And therefore, the master of ceremonies, or whoever is handling the situation, is usually forced to give the mic to Babu Owino. That did not happen in Siaya. What do you think that means? Because we know Babu Owino has been a consistent critic of President William Samoei Ruto, despite the bread-based government. We all know that. So what did that mean? Food for thought. And why is it so important that ODM remains in the broad-based government? What will happen if they withdraw? Huh? You don't know? Even the way Ruto praised ODM in his speech, it is very clear that the president is leaning very heavily on Raila Odinga, and the support he has, or rather the support he used to have, is very heavily leaning on him. He even said it in his own speech. One of his most humble moments. He said that he and Raila Odinga come from very far, and he did not know that one day Raila Odinga would be his political opponent. And then after that one day Raila Odinga would be the one to steady his government. So, what that means, if Raila Odinga and his crew pull out for reasons of political survival, what will happen to Ruto is obvious. Kwisha maneno as President of Kenya. Now, a few moments ago, I mentioned a particular special report, that actually predicted exactly what we're seeing before our eyes today. And it even predicted how this thing is going to end. Shocking stuff. Well, you can take full advantage of my latest offer, only strictly for 24 hours, where I'm going to offer this report. And in fact, the whole package of highly sensitive special reports are produced, for only Kenya shillings 1,999. You can see details on your screens right now. Please rush to avoid disappointment. This also includes the high-tech assassination of former President of Tanzania, John Pombe Magufuli, the hiccups involved, and the mess-ups with the assassination of former CDF, Bwana Ogola. You cannot afford to miss all these highly sensitive videos. There is even something on the coup and something on Ruto's character, which makes it very predictable what is going to happen next in our politics. Just use those details you see on your screens right now. Take quick action to avoid disappointment. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.